Mermaid Bay is full of many strange creatures, stranger legends, and strangest of all, people. One of those people is the lighthouse keeper of Rand Lighthouse, the lighthouse that guides living ships into Mermaid Bay, and it guides dead ships away from Mermaid Bay. Rand Lighthouse has been managed by the same family since the days of the very first people to migrate to Mermaid Bay from the northern forest. Although in the earliest days it was more likely to have been large bonfires rather than a lighthouse like most people think of them now. As time went on and more advanced construction methods became developed, the lighthouse was built, and it would become the first permanent building in all of Mermaid Bay, predating the first raiders from Europa by hundreds of years. Rand Lighthouse has been upgraded, built, and rebuilt many times over. And even now in the modern day, it is both Mermaid Bay's oldest and most modern building. It is the oldest building because it is the building that has kept its purpose the longest out of every building in Mermaid Bay. The lighthouse has always offered a light against the dying night. It is the most modern building in Mermaid Bay because it is given the best technology, the best structural engineering, and the best materials into every grain of cement. If the lighthouse is knocked over by a storm, it is rebuilt in less than a day. If it burns down, the people of Mermaid Bay rebuild it stronger than it was before. Why do they do that? Because of the rules of Mermaid Bay, and the rules of Mermaid Bay are vital. There's an old proverb among those who work in occupational safety. That proverb? Every single rule in the book is written in blood. No matter how obvious a rule, how simplistic a directive, or how backwards it feels, even if it feels like it slows you down or it feels dumb that it needs to be written down, it's written down for a reason. Every single rule was written because of the lives lost by breaking that rule. Not just one life, often many lives had to be lost to add one more line to the rules. This story, shared to me by the lighthouse keeper from their childhood, explains only one rule given to their family. A rule that cost hundreds of lives from the keeper family. Never steal a gift that was given by the sea. I was so young at that age, too young to be named and too young to work at that time, so I was supposed to learn. My eldest sister, Sinjin, was already working with the fishermen, bringing in both fish and pearls from the sea, and she was already betrothed at the age of 19. My two older brothers, twins, Magni and Moody, were helping my father at the lighthouse. I learned what I could watching how the lighthouse was maintained. I learned how to read and write with practice, and I spent a lot of time down at the beach. Magni and Moody were supposed to watch me, but they usually went off to the tide pool to poke hermit crabs and sea stars while I watched the ocean crash against the rocks. My parents taught me before I ever walked to never walk into the water at this beach. The waves were powerful enough to smash a full-grown man against the rocks, and that was the least dangerous part of the water. At every beach, they always pointed out a part of the surf that always looked calm, the part of the water the waves never touched. They always looked calm while everything around it was chaotic and pushing towards the beach. The corridor between the waves. They warned me of the riptide. They made it clear it was as dangerous as the waves were, and they were clearly dangerous to my young mind. The riptide was much more dangerous than the waves. A wave might push me back to shore. Someone might notice me and pull me out in time. If a riptide got me, no one would find me in enough time. I would be dead, and my family would never see me again. There were many stories about family members and friends who all fell into the riptide, so I knew it was dangerous. That one day, though, that early morning, what I was not expecting to see was a woman lightly treading water in the riptide. She was not pushed nor pulled by the riptide at all. Her hair was long, dark, and descended into the water, floating around her like seaweed. Her eyes were gray-blue, and she smiled when she saw me approach. "Hello there, child. May I have your name?" she asked me, only for me to shake my head. "Are you shy or just rude?" he called back up at me, and I shook my head even harder this time before I called out. I knew I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, but I also wasn't supposed to be rude to grown-ups. "I don't have a name. I'm too young," I told the woman in the water, who tutted before turning away from me. "Shame, child. Do you want to join me in the water? The water is relaxing and warm on this cold day," she told me before she turned to face me again. She swam closer to where I was on the beach. I couldn't see her legs, and even though she was less than a meter from the beach, she did not stand in the water. I didn't think it was strange at the time. "No, my parents told me not to go into the water unless I'm with a friend or family member," I told her, and she chuckled for a moment before she decided to try something else. "If I give you a gift, maybe that'll show you that I'm a trustworthy friend," she said as she pulled out something from the water. It was a fish hook, but it didn't resemble any fish hook that I was familiar with. It was large, far larger than any fish hook I've seen before. It was white as bone, and the barbs were all on one side. There was an odd hinge on both ends, both where the bait went and where the hook was meant to be tied to the line. The hook was tied to a short bit of fishing line made from what looked like a silver chain. She lifted the hook over the beach like she was going to drop it in the sand, but before she did, she spoke. "This fish hook is very special. It was given to me by my grandmother. It was carved out of her own jawbone, a jawbone she removed from her skull, and she carved into a fish hook for me to use. I'm sorry your grandmother's dead," I told the woman in the water, not sure what else to say. "I lost a grandmother recently. She had all of her fingernails and toenails torn off before being set on fire." The woman in the water shook her head. "I never said my grandmother was dead. I just said she no longer has a jawbone. She is still out there, eating her fish raw, wiggling, and living. She just doesn't have a lower jawbone. So she chews by grinding her food against her upper jaw with her tongue. But that isn't what makes this fish hook so special. What makes this fish hook so special is that you can use it to fish anything from the ocean. No bait and no rod required. You can bring anything from the ocean up to the surface. But be warned, child." He held up a single finger as she explained another part about how the fishhook's magic worked. Just as the fishhook can pull up anything from the ocean, the fishhook can also pull anything into the ocean. Even something as powerful as the sun or moon can be pulled into the ocean by this fishhook, if the fishermen so desired, and if they're strong enough to pull. So, when you use this fishhook to pull something from the ocean, be sure you're strong enough to pull it out. or else what you seek in the sea will pull you in. Do you understand? She asked me while I kept staring at the fish hook, wondering why it needed to be made from a grandmother's jawbone to work. Be careful and don't fish for more than you can catch. I told her to show her I understood as she handed the hook to me, and she gently pushed herself out into the ocean. I will see you tomorrow. Tell me all you catch with that jawbone, and you will know that I'm your friend, she called out as she swam beyond the horizon, and I could not see where she went. Now, curious, I tied the silver chain to a stick that felt like it could work as a fishing rod, and I threw the hook into the water and I waited. And for a while, nothing came up at all. My brothers checked on me once and they saw me sitting on the rock trying to fish for something in the waves while they laughed. You'll never catch anything that way, I remember Moody saying as him and Magni went back to the tide pool with a bucket to collect hermit crabs, and they left me a bucket, saying we would see who got more dinner for later. While they wandered off to the tide pool, I kept watching the surf while I tried to figure out what I was doing wrong. I was told it could pull anything from the ocean, but if it could pull up anything, how did it decide what to pull up? Maybe I had to decide. Shrimp, please? I asked the hook, and then I felt a light tug on my hook, and I pulled it up to see that I had dozens of large shrimp on the hook, each of them bigger than my hand. I dropped the hook into the water in the bucket and let the shrimp jump off the hook. As I threw my hook into the water again, and I asked again, more shrimp, please? I asked the hook as it descended into the water, and I pulled up even more shrimp to put into the bucket. It continued like this for less than 15 minutes, and I filled my bucket with shrimp for dinner. I began the process of carrying the shrimp back to the house when my brothers saw what I did, so they immediately ran over, carrying their bucket of hermit crabs, while they stared at the amount of shrimp I had. How did you get so many shrimp? Moody asked, and I showed him the hook on the line. It's this fish hook. It can pull up anything from the ocean, I said, showing Moody the fish hook, only for Magni to snatch it out of my hands. No, it doesn't. Tell the truth, Magni said as I tried to grab it from his hands, only to have Moody hold me back with one hand, while Magni looked over the hook. Seriously? No bait, no tackle, a hook and line? You couldn't catch a minnow with that, let alone a shrimp. Where did you steal the shrimp from? He asked, and again I told the truth. The fish hook came from the woman in the water. She said it could pull anything from the ocean, and it does. I told him, only for Magni to look it over, and now Moody was holding me back with both arms to keep me from getting my fish hook back. Well, if it does what you say, it doesn't belong to a no-name brat like you. It belongs to someone who is going to take over the lighthouse, Magni said with a laugh, and Moody also laughed along. Please give it back. It's dangerous if you don't use it right, I tried to warn him. But instead, he laughed again, and he decided to do something that would seal his fate. Clearly, you care about it, so tell you what, go get it, he said as he threw the rod with the hook attached into the surf. Moody decided to let me go then, and I ran to the surf to see if I could grab the hook and rod. By the time I made it to where the ocean met the rocks, I couldn't see the hook anymore. Before I had a chance to say something to Magni or Moody, Magni screamed. I turned to where he was, and I saw that he was on his stomach, grabbing at the ground, trying to slow himself down as something was pulling him face first into the ocean. Moody grabbed one leg and pulled while I went to grab his other leg as we both tried to pull him away from the ocean. Magni could only scream wordlessly as we tried to pull him back, and something in the ocean pulled him in. No matter how hard we pulled, he kept getting closer. Sometimes we might get lucky and pull him back for a step or two, only to lose our progress, and he got closer to the waves, crashing on the rocks. When his face was first pulled into the waves, he had to take gulping breaths between the waves to keep screaming, and as he got pulled closer, his screaming stopped as he was face down in the water. Still, the force pulled him into the shallows, just a meter from the shore, and he was still face down in the water, struggling and squirming to pull himself up. Moody and I tried to pull him out, to flip him over, or even pull him out of the water. Whatever the force was, wanted him to drown in the shallows. We kept trying to pull him out of the water, even when he stopped struggling, and by the time the force stopped and we could pull him to the shore, he was blue, water leaked out of his nose and mouth, and he wouldn't respond to what we were saying. Moody ran to get help while I stared at Magni, not processing what happened to my brother, until I saw something in his mouth. Curious, I reached over to see what it was, and when I pried open his mouth, I saw a small silver hook piercing the inside of his cheek. When his body was taken away, and they heard our story about the fish hook, the woman in the water, and how Magni stole the fish hook before throwing the fish hook into the water, it was decided that what happened was that Magni broke one of the rules of Mermaid Bay, and as sad as it was for him to die, breaking the rules had dire consequences in Mermaid Bay, and that was everyone's acceptance. It was tragic, but no more of a tragedy than being lost at sea, or having your head taken off by a troll line. You broke a rule, and it was your natural consequence. That night, my parents had a long talk with Moody and I about not stealing gifts from the sea. The sea offers gifts, such as the fish that are caught, the pearls that were found, and even the shells that wash upon the shore. However, just as the sea could give, it could just as easily take away. The sea was powerful enough to wipe away nations in a single night, bold enough to freeze navies in a single storm, and fierce enough to kill in a blink of an eye. So when a Nereid, like the woman I saw, offered me a gift from the sea, it was not something that should be stolen. A stolen gift from the sea was cursed and would bring devastation or death to the thief who stole the gift from the sea. The greater the gift, the greater the curse. They also warned me, since the Nereid had decided to have me as her prey, that she would offer me more and more gifts to try and trick me into the water with her. If I went into the water with her, she would drown me. I apparently got lucky that she wasn't watching when Magni was dragged into the water, or she wouldn't have let me go. When I asked if I should just refuse her gifts, they said that was a very bad idea, because if I refused her gifts, she would simply move on and find a new child to drown. That wasn't solving the problem, that was just making it someone else's problem. Our family was a lot of things, but we weren't the kind of people to curse someone else just to free ourselves. We either broke the curse, or we kept it. We are keepers. So when I asked them how do we get rid of the Nereid, they told me to keep accepting her gifts, and I would also have to offer her gifts as well. She was at her most powerful in the ocean. However, if I could tempt her to walk onto land, she would be powerless and she would dissolve into sea foam. They also warned me to avoid trying to force her onto land and to avoid threatening her. However powerful I think I was, or how clever I thought my plan was, the Nereid was stronger, she was wiser, and she was older. I had to use flattery, and I had to appeal to her greed, not her charity. So that night I tried to think of a few different ways I could convince her to walk onto the shore. The next day I approached the same shore where I saw her before, and I had to approach her alone. If I was with someone, she wouldn't have appeared. So instead, I walked down the beach with my gifts in a basket, and I could see her floating on the shore, lying on her back. She was indeed naked, and her hair seemed even longer, floating around her entire body, like she was lying on a bed of brown kelp. When she saw me, she swam towards me on her stomach, with most of her body hidden as she called out, "Did you enjoy your gift?" she asked me as I awkwardly smiled and I nodded. "I caught a lot of shrimp with it," I told her, ignoring the fact that it also killed my brother when he threw it into the ocean. I sat my basket down, and I sat just beyond where the waves could reach me. "Well, do you believe that we are friends now?" she asked with a smile that seemed too sharp. I could see just beneath her lips that they were more shark-like than anything. There was more than one row of triangular teeth, and I could see that even more were forming in her gums. I remembered what my parents said as I opened my basket, and I nodded. "I do think we're friends, and I realize I haven't gotten you a gift yet," I told her, and I could see a flash of thoughts across her face. She wanted to drown me, however, she didn't get gifts often, so clearly she wanted to see what I offered her. So the first thing I pulled out of the basket was a brush, the nicest brush in town we could get, one with silver teeth and an ivory handle, one that would be fit for royalty, and one that we were certain she couldn't have gotten in the sea. "I noticed that you have beautiful hair, and I figured someone with such lovely hair deserved to have a beautiful brush for that hair," I said as I held the brush over the water, and she grabbed the brush. She examined it closely before she began to slowly brush her hair in the water, clearly fascinated by how well the bristles ran through her hair. She smiled genuinely towards me. "This is such a lovely gift. I hope to try it more after we swim today," she said as she reached out another hand to me, and I reached back into the basket. "But I have another gift for you. Surely you want to see all of your gifts before we swim?" I asked her, and I could see the flash of greed in her eyes. She now knew that there was more than one gift. Surely it would be worth it to wait, especially since the basket was beyond the reach of her waves. So if she drowned me first, she would never know what was in the basket. So now, instead of thinking about how to drown me, she was thinking about her next gift. Her greed now stronger than her murder lust, and that was how I would get her on land. "I have this for you," I said as I pulled out fresh fish and chips wrapped in newspaper. The smell was salivating, even to me, and I could see she was curious about this odd food. "What is this?" she asked as I pulled out my own portion. "It's a special food made in Mermaid Bay. It tastes incredible, but you have to be careful. The paper dissolves in water, so I can't bring it into the water, I told her as she thought about it for a moment. The smell of food finally brought her to stand in the shallowest part of the water, where she could sit on a rock and leave her ankles in the water, and I could sit on the rock next to her, careful not to touch the water below. I held out her fish and chips and grabbed the newspaper before she could begin to eat the fried food. I could see on her face it was better than she realized as she voraciously devoured the fried fish and potatoes. I ate my own, and soon it was all gone. That was the best thing I've eaten in a long time, she told me as she reached out her hand towards me. Would you like to swim now? She asked me with a smile, and I held up a single finger. I have one more gift for you, I told her as I got off my rock, and I walked over to the basket. When I grabbed the basket and I turned around, I could see her lying on her stomach on the rock with her feet in the water while she watched me grab the basket. What other wonderful gift do you have for me? She asked, her head resting on her hands as I pulled out the final gift from the basket, and I held it out to her with my single hand. She saw what was in my hand, and she did not say a single word, nor did I say a single word as she stepped out of the water for the first time in her life. As she reached for her gift, each step she took, she appeared to age by decades. I watched her incredibly long hair turn white from the roots, and it slowly descended down to the tips of her hair. Her body sagged, limped, and wrinkled as she reached out for her gift, her bony, greedy fingers reaching out for her gift, only for her to dissolve into sea foam on the ground, never touching her gift, leaving behind only her brush in the sea foam, and I glanced at the gift I offered her. A simple hand mirror, borrowed from my older sister, a mirror that reflected the Nereid's beauty back to her. I figured if she was obsessed with flattery and her own beauty, that she would love to possess a mirror, especially since the water in the sea was never placid enough to actually create a reflection. I did not, however, expect her to step out of the water like that without even saying a word, but still that meant we were free. She would never bother me nor anyone in my family ever again. So I collected the mirror and the brush as I made my way back up to the house. The lighthouse keeper still keeps both the mirror and the brush to this very day. Although they were able to kill the Nereid and save many other lives, they still have to live with the knowledge that the Nereid took the life of their older brother. The world lives on, and yet monsters still take lives. The stories are told, and every generation someone makes a mistake. Oftentimes they make the same mistake. You tell your child not to swim beyond the bay, and they still think they'll be the ones to make it. You warn not to steal from magical creatures, and still they think that they'll be the first ones to successfully steal magic. That they'll be the ones who think of something new that no one had ever tried before. That they'll be the one who gets lucky enough to have a crazy adventure and get the gold by stepping over the skeletons of everyone else who tried the same thing before them. And still, they make the same mistakes. When people listen to the stories, they see themselves as the knight that finally slays the dragon when everyone else has failed. After all, whoever spares a single thought about all of the bones you have to step over to try and slay the dragon? So, why do we share these stories if people keep making the same mistakes? We share them because not everyone makes the same mistake. For the child who thinks that going into the dragon's hoard will work, there is the child that listens and manages to trick the dragon into leaving the hoard. For every child who tries to swim beyond the bay, there is the child who learned how to make a boat to go beyond that bay. For every child that tries to steal from the ocean, there is the child that learns how to give back to the ocean. There are a great number of magical beings, objects, and gifts that exist in the world. They are all as unique and varied as the people of Earth, but something they all have in common. When given willingly, the object works as it is intended. It is a tool, a trinket, a toy. When it is stolen, however, it still works as intended, however what is intended changes. A pot intended to feed a family will poison a thief. A mirror intended to show you at your true best will only show a thief their true worst. A hook intended to pull anything from the ocean will pull anything into the ocean. And that is why most magical objects are buried or burned with their owners. They weren't gifted before death, so they can only ever be stolen.